Matthew Evans, a wealthy man in his late 70s, sat alone in his silver Mercedes. He tapped his thumb impatiently on the steering wheel. The air conditioner was on, but it barely cooled the car in the Kentucky heat. Matthew had made his fortune in finance and was used to things going his way. But today, he was stuck on the side of the road with a flat tire, far from his comfortable mansion on the outskirts of town. He tried calling for roadside assistance, but there was no signal. Frustrated, he sighed and decided he'd have to wait. Just as he was starting to feel annoyed, he noticed a young boy walking toward him. The boy, around 13 or 14, wore a faded t-shirt and old sneakers. He looked determined as he approached. "Got a flat, sir?" the boy asked, his voice calm and polite. "Yes, I do," Matthew replied, feeling both relieved and a little uneasy. "I was hoping for some help, but my phone doesn't work out here." The boy smiled slightly. "I can help with that," he said. Without waiting, he knelt by the flat tire. "My grandpa taught me how to change a tire last summer. Do you have a spare?" Matthew pointed to the trunk, and the boy quickly got to work. He moved with confidence, his hands steady as he changed the tire. Matthew watched, feeling a strange sense of humility he hadn't felt in years. He wanted to give the boy something in return, but the boy stayed focused, not looking for praise or reward. After a few minutes, the boy stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "All done," he said, with a small, satisfied smile. Matthew reached into his wallet and pulled out some cash. "Here, take this. I really appreciate your help." But the boy stepped back, shaking his head. "Thank you, sir, but I don't need anything. Just happy to help." Matthew was stunned. He stood there, money in hand, as the boy turned and walked away. The interaction left Matthew feeling moved, though he wasn't sure why. Alone again, he put the money back in his wallet and got into his car. Matthew watched in the rearview mirror as the boy's figure grew smaller in the distance. For the rest of the drive, he couldn't stop thinking about him. There was something special about the boy. A quiet confidence that didn't come from money or privilege, but from something deeper. That night, sitting alone in his big, fancy house, Matthew couldn't shake the image of the boy walking away with nothing but a smile. Matthew sat in his study, surrounded by books he never read. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. His dinner, a perfectly cooked steak and asparagus, sat untouched on the table. His mind kept going back to the boy. In his life, Matthew had met thousands of people, business partners, employees, investors. Most interactions were about deals, favors, or money. There was always something to gain. But this boy had helped him without asking for anything in return. It was just kindness. Matthew sipped his scotch, leaning back in his chair. He thought about the boy's confident smile and how he carried himself. The boy didn't seem to have much. His clothes were worn, his shoes old, his hands dusty. But he had a kind of honesty and strength that Matthew rarely saw anymore. The next morning, Matthew felt a strong urge to find the boy. He didn't know why. Maybe it was guilt, gratitude, or just curiosity. But he couldn't let it go. He drove back to the same road, looking for any sign of the boy. He stopped at gas stations and diners, asking people if they'd seen a boy matching the description. Most people just shrugged or said no. Finally, an older woman at a small cafe spoke up. "Sounds like you're talking about Elijah," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "That boy's always helping folks around here. Lives with his mama over in Harlan." "Harlan," Matthew repeated, making a mental note. "Thank you." Harlan was an hour away, tucked into the Appalachian foothills. The drive was beautiful, but Matthew barely noticed. His mind was full of questions. What kind of life did this boy have? What kind of family raised someone like that? When he arrived in Harlan, the streets were quiet, lined with small homes and businesses. He asked a few locals about Elijah. Matthew was eventually directed to a small house on the edge of town. The house looked old but well kept, with a front porch that sagged a little under its weight. He parked his car and hesitated, unsure of what to say. Taking a deep breath, he knocked on the door. A woman in her early 40s answered. She looked tired but kind, her eyes sharp and curious as she looked him over. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Good morning," Matthew said, clearing his throat. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I think I met your son yesterday. Elijah, right? He helped me with a flat tire." Her expression softened. "That sounds like my Elijah," she said with a small smile. "He's always helping people." "I just wanted to thank him properly," Matthew explained. "He wouldn't take anything from me yesterday." She nodded and stepped aside to let him in. "He's out back. You're welcome to wait." Matthew stepped inside, looking around. The furniture was old but clean, and the walls were covered with family photos and drawings that looked like they were made by a younger Elijah. It was very different from his own fancy home, but it felt warm and full of life. He followed her to the backyard, where Elijah was fixing the fence. The boy looked up, surprised to see Matthew. "Hey, mister," Elijah said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What are you doing here?" Matthew smiled, feeling a little nervous. "I wanted to thank you again. You helped me when I really needed it, and I couldn't stop thinking about it." Elijah shrugged, his expression calm and genuine. It wasn't a big deal. But to Matthew, it was. He was determined to show his gratitude. Elijah leaned against the fence, looking at Matthew curiously. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The boy's calm and confident manner made Matthew feel a little awkward, as if he were the one being judged. "I don't think you realize how much it meant to me," Matthew finally said, breaking the silence. "Most people don't help strangers without expecting something in return." Elijah tilted his head, looking a little confused. "I don't see it that way," he replied. "If someone needs help and I can do something, why wouldn't I?" Matthew was struck by how simple and honest the boy's answer was. He looked past Elijah to the yard. The fence was patched together with mismatched pieces of wood, and the grass was uneven and thin. Behind the house, an old swing set leaned to one side, its chains rusty and broken. It was clear Elijah's family didn't have much, but they made the best of what they had. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," Matthew said, meaning it. "Your mother must be proud." Elijah grinned, glancing back toward the house. "She works hard. I just try to help out where I can." Matthew was quiet for a moment, thinking about the boy's words. He remembered his own childhood, growing up in a house much like this one. His parents had worked tirelessly to make ends meet, teaching him the value of hard work and perseverance. Over the years, Matthew had forgotten the lessons of his childhood, getting caught up in chasing money and status. Now, standing in Elijah's yard, he felt a mix of nostalgia and regret. "I'd like to do something for you and your family," Matthew finally said. Elijah stood up straight, looking cautious. "We're okay, mister. We don't need anything." "It's not about need," Matthew insisted. "It's about what's right. You helped me, and I'd like to return the favor." Before Elijah could respond, his mother stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Elijah, come inside and wash up before lunch," she called. Then she turned to Matthew. "Would you like to join us? It's nothing fancy, but you're welcome." Matthew hesitated. He wasn't used to such invitations, but her sincerity made it hard to say no. "I'd like that," he said, following her inside. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread and roasted vegetables. The table was small, with mismatched chairs, but it was set with care. Matthew sat down, feeling out of place in his expensive suit among the humble surroundings. Elijah washed his hands and joined them, his easy smile never fading. As they ate, Matthew found himself drawn into their conversation. Elijah talked about school, his friends, and his dream of becoming an engineer. His mother shared stories about their community, speaking with quiet pride about how people looked out for one another. Matthew listened closely, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Despite all his wealth, his own home felt cold and empty compared to this modest house filled with laughter and genuine connection. After lunch, as they cleared the table, Matthew turned to Elijah's mother. "You've done an amazing job raising him," he said. "He's got more heart than most people I know." She smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you. He's a good boy, but we've had our struggles. We've learned to appreciate the small things." Matthew nodded, his mind already working on ideas. He didn't want to overstep, but he couldn't leave without doing something for them. This family had given him a gift he didn't even know he needed. A reminder of what truly mattered. That afternoon, Matthew left their home with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. As he drove back to his estate, he began to make plans. This wasn't about charity. It was about honoring Elijah's kindness and his family's strength. Elijah and his mother deserved more than patched fences and old furniture. They deserved stability and recognition for the strength they showed every day. The next morning, Matthew got to work. He made calls, lots of them. He reached out to old colleagues, contractors, and suppliers. By midday, he had a plan. Within a week, trucks and workers arrived at Elijah's home. Matthew stood on the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, directing the renovations. Elijah and his mother watched in shock. "You didn't have to do this," Elijah's mother said, her voice shaking as she saw the crew unload supplies. "We've managed fine on our own." Matthew turned to her, his expression serious. "You've done more than manage. You've thrived. But you gave me something I didn't know I was missing. Let me give back." Elijah was quieter than usual, standing next to his mother, with a thoughtful look on his face. Matthew knelt down to meet his eyes. "You taught me something, Elijah. Helping people isn't about money. It's about showing up. I want to show up for you." Over the next few weeks, the house was transformed. The sagging porch was replaced with strong new wood. The roof was fixed, and the old rusty swing set was replaced with a brand new one. Inside, the walls were painted, the floors polished, and the kitchen updated with modern appliances. At first, Elijah tried to help with the work, carrying planks and sweeping debris. But Matthew insisted he take a break. "Your job," Matthew said with a smile, "is to enjoy being a kid for a little while." Still, Elijah couldn't resist sneaking out to watch the crew work. His eyes lit up with curiosity as he watched them measure, cut, and build. One of the workers, a big man named Joe, noticed Elijah's interest and invited him to help measure wood planks. Before long, Elijah was asking questions about tools and construction, his excitement contagious. Matthew watched from a distance, feeling a warm sense of pride. For the first time in years, Matthew felt like he was doing something meaningful, something bigger than himself. Elijah's energy reminded him of the ambition he once had, before his life became all about boardrooms and money. One evening, as the sun set, the renovation project was almost finished. The family stood on the porch, amazed at the changes. Elijah's mother turned to Matthew, her voice filled with emotion. "This isn't just a house anymore. It's a home. I don't know how we can ever thank you." Matthew shook his head, his voice soft. "You already have. You reminded me of what life is really about: family, connection, and purpose. I think I'm the one who should be thanking you." The final day of the project felt like a celebration. Neighbors stopped by to see the changes, bringing small gifts like fresh bread, homemade jam, and even a potted plant. Elijah's laughter filled the yard as he showed his friends the new swing set and freshly painted rooms. Inside, the house, once worn and tired, now felt full of life. Matthew stood on the porch, leaning against the new railing, watching it all. He hadn't felt this kind of joy in years, simple, pure joy from seeing others thrive. Elijah's mother walked over, handing him a cup of iced tea. "You've done more than fix a house," she said softly. "You've given us hope. And I think you've found something for yourself, too." Matthew nodded, taking a sip. "I have," he admitted. "I spent so many years chasing things I thought mattered. Money, status, influence. But none of it feels like this. None of it ever filled me the way this has." As the sun set, Elijah joined them on the porch, still full of energy. He looked at Matthew thoughtfully. "Mr. Matthew," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about what you did for us. I want to do something like that one day. I want to help people too." Matthew put a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "You already are, Elijah. Your kindness set all of this in motion. Don't ever lose that." The three of them sat together, watching the sky turn from gold to deep orange. The warmth of the day lingered, but there was a deeper warmth too, one that came from connection, gratitude, and a shared sense of purpose. When it was time for Matthew to leave, Elijah and his mother walked him to his car. Elijah's wide grin and his mother's tearful smile stayed in Matthew's memory as he drove away. He realized this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter for all of them. In the weeks that followed, more changes came. Elijah's curiosity about construction grew into a passion. Matthew arranged for him to spend time with the workers who had helped renovate the house. Elijah soaked up every bit of knowledge, eager to learn. Matthew, in turn, found himself returning to Harlan again and again. Each visit felt less like a trip and more like coming home. He no longer felt like an outsider. He was part of something bigger now. And for the first time in years, he was content. The story ended where it began, in a small town with a big heart. One act of kindness from a young boy reminded an old man of life's greatest lesson. It's not about what you have. It's about what you give.
A 10-year-old black boy said the truth out loud. His teacher humiliated him in front of the whole class. But the real lesson came when his father, the actual mayor, walked in without saying a word. It started right after morning announcements at Oakwood Elementary in Topeka, Kansas. The bell had just rung, and the sound of chairs scraping and kids settling into their seats filled the classroom. Mrs. Trudy Halbrook stood at the front, arms crossed like always, tapping her pen against the whiteboard. She was the kind of teacher who kept things tight. Rules mattered more than smiles. For most kids, she was tolerable, strict, but predictable. 10-year-old Malik Jefferson sat by the window, third row back. He was one of those kids who didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. Not because he was loud, but because he always spoke like he meant it. That morning, he had a little extra pride in his chest. His dad had just held a big press conference the night before about new scholarships for underserved communities. Malik had seen him on TV and felt like the whole city finally knew what he already did. His dad cared. Mrs. Halbrook was running through the day's schedule when she mentioned a special visitor coming to the school on Friday. "Someone from City Hall," she said, adjusting her glasses. "But they haven't told me who." Malik's hand went up just a little. "Yes, Malik?" she asked, already sounding annoyed. I think it might be my dad, he said calmly. He said he was coming here this week. He's the mayor. The room went quiet. A couple of kids turned their heads. One girl whispered, Wait, really? Mrs. Halbrook blinked at him. Then she let out a short, sharp laugh, more like a scoff. Oh, Malik. That's creative, she said, drawing out the last word like it stung. Let's not make things up just to sound important. Okay? He didn't smile, didn't laugh, just sat there, eyes forward. I'm not making it up, he said softly. He's Mayor Jefferson. Her smile faded. Malik, this is a place for learning, not for telling tall tales. If the mayor were your father, I think we'd all know by now, don't you? The silence was thicker now. Some of the kids shifted in their chairs. A boy in the back let out a quiet laugh. Malik stared at the desk in front of him. His hands stayed still in his lap. Let's stick to facts, not fairy tales, she added, and moved on with the lesson. But nobody was really listening anymore. They were still thinking about what she'd just said, and how she'd said it. The words weren't just dismissive. They carried something colder. A message. One that said, someone like you couldn't possibly be someone like that's son. But the part that stung most wasn't what she said. It was how quickly the class accepted it. A girl named Jasmine, who usually sat with Malik at lunch, avoided his eyes for the rest of the morning. Two boys near the window whispered and giggled whenever he spoke up again. Malik stayed quiet for the rest of the lesson, not because he was afraid, but because it didn't feel worth it. Later that day, in the hallway, his friend Bryce caught up to him near the lockers. Hey, man, Bryce said, a little hesitant. Is it true? About your dad? Malik didn't even hesitate. Yeah, Bryce nodded slowly. She didn't have to say it like that. She thinks I'm lying. Bryce looked down. You should tell the principal. Malik gave a weak shrug. Would it even matter? And for a second, Bryce didn't have an answer. Inside the classroom, Mrs. Halbrook went back to teaching like nothing happened. She probably thought the moment was over. A kid told a lie. A teacher corrected him. End of story. But that's the thing about words. They don't always stop ringing when the bell does. But this story doesn't stop in the classroom, because someone outside those walls had already heard what happened, and they weren't going to stay silent. By Thursday morning, Malik didn't want to be there. He woke up early like always, got dressed, sat through breakfast with his mom, who noticed he was quieter than usual. But he didn't say much. He wasn't the type to complain. That's not how he was raised. But something heavy sat in his chest. It was the feeling of knowing you told the truth and still got laughed at for it. When he walked into room 204, Mrs. Halbrook was already writing the warm-up on the board. The classroom looked the same as yesterday. Same rows, same posters, same teacher, but it didn't feel the same. Kids whispered more than usual. A few looked over at Malik and quickly looked away. He caught Jasmine whispering to another girl, eyes darting toward him, giggling under her breath. And then came the moment that set everything off again. Mrs. Halbrook began a history lesson, something about community leaders and local government. The irony was so thick it could have filled the whole school. While writing elected officials across the whiteboard, she turned and glanced briefly at Malik. She smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. You know, she said, turning to the class, we should always be careful about pretending we're someone we're not. It's important to be honest, especially when it comes to serious roles like mayor or governor. She didn't say his name, but she didn't have to. Every eye in the classroom turned to Malik like it was choreographed. He didn't react, just kept his head down and wrote the date in his notebook. But let's focus on reality, she continued, still smiling. Anyone can say they're the mayor's kid. That doesn't make it true. What matters is what's proven. Someone let out a laugh near the back, the kind that bursts out when tension snaps for a second. She didn't stop them. If anything, she was enjoying it, like she'd just delivered a well-timed joke. But it wasn't a joke to Malik. It wasn't a lesson either. It was humiliation in disguise, served up with a professional tone and a whiteboard marker in her hand. He clenched his pencil harder. Not to break it, just to stay grounded. In the front row, Bryce sat still, uncomfortable, his mouth slightly open like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. The rest of the lesson passed in a blur. For the first time, Malik didn't raise his hand, didn't offer to read, didn't even finish the worksheet. At recess, he walked the perimeter of the playground alone. Nobody asked if he was okay. They were too busy acting like the punchline was still funny. Bryce caught up with him again near the jungle gym. "You really should tell someone." "I did," Malik said. "Who?" "My mom. Is she going to call the school?" "She told my dad." Bryce blinked. "Wait, the mayor?" Malik nodded. There was a pause. "What's he going to do?" Malik looked out past the fence. "He said I should keep showing up." That sounded simple, but it hit hard. Malik didn't need his dad to yell or storm the building. He needed to know someone still believed him. And he did. That afternoon, during silent reading time, Mrs. Halbrook brought up respecting authority as part of the discussion. She asked a few questions, then paused before adding, "And of course, we shouldn't claim to be someone we're not to gain that authority either. That would be dishonest and disrespectful to the real leaders in our community." This time, she looked directly at Malik. Long enough for it to feel intentional, personal. He looked up at her, then slowly back at his book. Mrs. Halbrook turned away, probably thinking the matter was done. Maybe she assumed her little speeches had settled the classroom back into order, that the lesson had been taught and her authority restored. But what she didn't realize was that someone else had heard more than enough, and they were on their way to make sure the lesson she thought she was teaching got completely rewritten. The cafeteria at Oakwood Elementary was a loud place, not because of chaos, but because of routine. Trays clattering, chairs screeching, juice boxes hissing open. But that Thursday, there was a different kind of noise. The kind that stuck to certain tables and circled one name like it had a target on it. Malik sat across from Bryce at the far end of table 5, poking at the tater tots on his tray. He hadn't touched his chocolate milk, which was rare. Normally, it was the first thing gone. Bryce leaned in, voice low. "People are still talking about it." "I know. I heard Ava say her mom told her Mayor Jefferson's son goes to a private school." Malik looked up, eyebrow raised. "I do go to a private school. I just transferred here 2 months ago. My mom wanted me closer to her job." "Oh, yeah." Bryce scratched his head. "I guess people just want to believe you're lying. They'd rather believe that than that I'm telling the truth." They both looked down the table, where 2 kids were giggling and whispering, glancing back and forth at Malik. One of them, a boy named Derek, leaned over and said, just loud enough, "Guess anyone can say their dad's the mayor now, huh?" Malik didn't answer. Bryce stood up halfway, then stopped himself. "Not worth it," Malik muttered. The whole room felt colder, even though the sun poured through the windows like any other day. But kids had a way of carrying an echo. When something was said once, it rolled around like a marble on a tile floor. It didn't go away just because you stopped talking. Jasmine passed by their table with 2 friends, and one of them whispered, "He still thinks he's the mayor's kid." That was the moment Bryce stood up all the way. "You'll need to shut up," he said loudly, his voice cracking slightly. Heads turned. Jasmine looked startled for a second, then crossed her arms. "We're just saying what everybody's already thinking." "Yeah? Well, maybe everybody needs to stop thinking like Mrs. Halbrook." You could feel the shift. A few kids widened their eyes. A couple even whispered, "Ooh," under their breath. Bryce sat down fast, heart pounding. Malik didn't say anything. He just looked at his friend, and for the first time that day, his mouth curved just barely at the edges. But lunch wasn't over yet. From a nearby table, a girl named Kaylee raised her hand halfway in the air and said, "Wait, I saw Mayor Jefferson last year at the ribbon cutting at West Park. Didn't he have a kid with him?" Bryce turned to her. "Yeah, that was Malik." She squinted. His hair was different. "It was shorter back then," Malik said, finally speaking up. Kaylee stared at him. "Oh." A few kids at her table went quiet. One looked unsure. Another leaned in and whispered something. Slowly, the doubt began to crack. It didn't break apart entirely, but it wobbled a little. That's how it starts sometimes. Not with an announcement or apology, but with confusion, silence, a gap in the noise that wasn't there before. When the bell rang and lunch ended, Malik grabbed his tray and stood. He didn't rush, didn't slump. He moved like someone who knew something others didn't. Bryce followed. As they passed Mrs. Halbrook's classroom on their way back, they saw her standing near the doorway, speaking to another teacher. She spotted them but didn't smile. Just looked. 1 second too long. Bryce glanced over at Malik. "She knows your dad's coming, doesn't she? He said he'd stop by today." Malik replied. Didn't say when. They didn't talk much after that. There was nothing left to say. The whispering had reached every corner of the building, and whether anyone believed him or not didn't matter now. But the truth wasn't done with that classroom just yet, because something bigger was already moving in, and it was closer than they thought. By the time Anthony Jefferson walked into his office at City Hall that Thursday morning, his phone had already buzzed twice. His assistant, Carla, was waiting with a folder under one arm, and that face she only made when something needed to be handled delicately. "It's about Malik," she said, before he even got his blazer off. Anthony stopped mid-step. "What about him?" Carla closed the door gently behind her. "You might want to sit down." He didn't. She opened the folder. Inside were 2 printed emails. One was from another parent who had heard about an incident in Mrs. Halbrook's classroom. The second was from the school secretary, someone Anthony had known for years, who wanted him to be aware of an ongoing situation involving his son being questioned publicly by his teacher regarding his family background. Anthony read them both slowly. No reaction on his face. No anger. No panic. He just sighed. Carla watched him carefully. "Do you want me to call the school?" "No," he said. "I'll handle it." She nodded and left, quietly. Anthony stood there for a moment, staring at the city map on the wall. He wasn't just the mayor, he was the first black mayor Topeka had ever had. And he'd fought hard for that seat. Not for the title, but because he believed in visibility, representation, the idea that kids like Malik could grow up knowing they belonged. He sat down, picked up his phone, and dialed a number from memory. "Hello?" came his wife's voice on the other end. "Did Malik say anything to you?" There was a pause. "He told me what happened yesterday," she said. "But he didn't want to make a big deal." "It is a big deal," Anthony said. "She humiliated him in front of everyone." His wife sighed. "He said he was okay." "He's not." Another pause. "So what are you going to do?" "I'm going to the school." "Do you want me to come?" "No, but I need you to pick him up after." "All right," she said gently. "Make it count." He hung up, stood, grabbed his navy suit jacket from the back of the chair, and straightened his tie in the mirror. This wasn't about confrontation. He didn't need to argue with anyone. That wasn't his way. But some lessons had to be taught face to face. As he left the building, 2 aides tried to stop him with last-minute requests. He waved them off politely but firmly. "This won't take long," he said. The driver opened the car door for him without question. No one asked where he was headed, but they knew by the look on his face, wherever it was, it mattered. The ride to Oakwood Elementary was quiet. As the car pulled into the school's visitor lot, a few students were just finishing recess. He saw Malik across the yard, walking back to the building with another boy. His posture looked heavier than usual. Anthony didn't wave, didn't call out. He just watched. He waited in the front office for a minute while the receptionist made a call to room 204. She offered him coffee. He declined. 10 minutes later, a hallway aide showed him the way. He walked slowly. Not because he was nervous, but because he wanted time to look around. To see what kind of place this was. What kind of world his son had to navigate while he sat in city council meetings and answered questions from reporters. Outside room 204, he paused. He could hear the murmur of a lesson inside. He let the aide return to her post, then gently turned the knob and pushed the door open. The lesson stopped mid-sentence. 30 sets of eyes turned toward the door, and standing there, tall, poised, not smiling, was Mayor Anthony Jefferson. But what no one in that room realized yet was that this visit wasn't about politics. It was about fatherhood, truth, and making sure silence didn't win. The classroom stilled like someone had hit pause on everything. Mrs. Halbrook's mouth parted just slightly. Her marker hovered mid-air, halfway through writing civic responsibility across the board. For a second, she didn't move. The entire class turned from her to the man standing at the door. Malik looked up. His breath caught, not out of fear, but something else. Relief. Recognition. The way his father filled a room wasn't with noise or drama. It was with presence, the kind that didn't ask for attention. It just was. Mayor Jefferson stepped inside, not in a rush, not in a fury. He didn't look angry. He didn't look smug. He looked like a man who knew exactly what had been said, and who needed it to stop. Mrs. Halbrook spoke first. Mayor Jefferson, this is a surprise. He nodded once. I'm sure it is. She stepped aside awkwardly, as if trying to create space for him, though she was the one who suddenly seemed out of place. The mayor looked around. I'd like to speak to the class for a moment, if that's all right. She hesitated. Well, I wasn't informed of I won't be long. She stepped back further. Anthony Jefferson turned to the students. Some of you know me. Some of you might not. My name is Anthony Jefferson. I'm the mayor of this city. But more importantly, he paused and let his eyes land on Malik. I'm Malik's dad. The silence deepened. Not a cough. Not a whisper. Even the kids who had been giggling the day before were frozen now. He continued, his tone even. Yesterday and today, my son was told, by someone in authority, that he couldn't possibly be who he said he was. That claiming me as his father was some kind of joke. He didn't look at Mrs. Halbrook. Not once. But everyone knew who he meant. Now, I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I don't believe in that. But I do believe in moments. Moments where people learn what respect looks like, and what it doesn't. He took a breath and scanned the classroom. Respect is listening to someone even when their story doesn't match your assumptions. It's believing a kid when they speak, especially when they're speaking truth, and it's recognizing that your expectations don't define someone else's reality. A girl in the front row shifted in her seat. Malik watched quietly, not blinking, absorbing every word. Anthony continued. Being mayor isn't just about laws or meetings. It's about setting examples. My son didn't need me to defend him. He needed me to show up. And here I am. Still no one moved. Then slowly he turned to face the woman at the front of the room. Mrs. Halbrook, he said, voice still calm. I trust this won't happen again. Not to my son. Not to any student. She opened her mouth like she might say something, but no words came out. Just a nod, stiff and uncertain. He didn't need more. Turning back to the class, he said, I'll leave you all to your learning. And Malik, he met his son's eyes again. We'll talk later. Malik nodded. For the first time all day, his chest felt light. Mayor Jefferson turned and walked out. No fanfare, no applause, just silence so full it rang louder than any shouting ever could. Back in the hallway, Anthony paused. He didn't need to look back. Inside the classroom, no one laughed. No one whispered. Mrs. Halbrook stood frozen, hands clasped too tightly. The lesson had stopped, but something else had started. But even though the mayor had left the room, the impact hadn't. Not by a long shot, because some words you can't erase and some truths stay even when the door closes. The rest of the school day limped along like someone had unplugged the electricity. The students sat quieter, more focused, not because they were afraid, but because they were aware. Something had shifted, something real. Mrs. Halbrook tried to pick up where she left off. Her voice was steady, but her hands fumbled with the marker. She didn't look up much, didn't call on Malik, didn't refer to civic responsibility again either. Malik, for his part, sat straighter. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He just listened, took notes, answered a question when asked, like always. Except this time, everyone was actually listening. At the end of class, as the bell rang and backpacks zipped, students moved slower. Some sneaked glances at Malik as they walked past. A few muttered, "See you," or gave small nods. Jasmine hesitated by the door, looking like she wanted to say something, but ended up walking off with her friends instead. Bryce lingered by Malik's desk. "You okay?" "Yeah," Malik said. Then, he didn't yell. Bryce nodded. Didn't have to. That's what stayed with everyone more than anything. The way Mayor Jefferson walked into that classroom, said what needed to be said, and walked out without ever raising his voice. There was no shouting, no threats, no dramatic scene. He told the truth. And truth didn't need volume. It just needed to be said. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Halbrook sat alone at her desk while the halls emptied. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard, a blank email draft in front of her. She kept thinking about the look in Anthony Jefferson's eyes. Not angry, not cruel, just disappointed and confident, like he'd seen this exact kind of behavior before. Like he was tired of it. She thought about what she'd said. Not just to Malik, but around him, about him. The sarcasm, the tone, the disbelief. It all echoed now, loud and unwanted. No one had scolded her. No one had put her name in the papers. But the shame was real, and it stuck. She clicked the email shut without typing anything. At home that evening, Malik sat on the couch doing homework when his dad came in. He took off his tie and sat down beside him. "You handled yourself well," Anthony said. Malik looked up. "I didn't do anything." "You didn't fold. You didn't shrink. That counts." Malik closed his notebook. "Why didn't you say something to her before?" he asked. "I wanted you to find your own voice first," his father said. "But once someone disrespects your name in front of a room full of people, that's not a public lesson anymore. That's public. And I don't let public disrespect go unanswered." Malik was quiet for a second. "She looked scared," he said. "She should have felt accountable. That's different." They sat in silence for a while. Comfortable. Honest. Later, Malik's mum brought in dinner. The television played the evening news in the background. There was no mention of the school, no headlines, no attention, but that didn't matter. What needed to happen had already happened. At school the next day, things were different. Not magically fixed, but different. Mrs. Halbrook greeted the class with less edge. She didn't overcorrect, didn't perform some forced apology, but her voice lacked that bite. Her eyes no longer rolled when Malik raised his hand. And when he mentioned his father in passing during a writing assignment, she said nothing at all. Students gave Malik more space. Some even gave him quiet respect, not because of who his dad was, but because of how he'd handled it all. Calm, honest, steady. That was the part that stayed. But even as the routine settled back in, one thing was clear. Everyone had heard the truth, and the silence around it had finally been broken. The following Monday, the school halls were just as noisy as ever. Sneakers squeaked, lockers slammed, and laughter bounced off the tiled walls. But something had quietly shifted, not just in room 204, but across the whole building. Kids weren't whispering about Malik anymore. If anything, they were watching him differently now, not like a myth, not like a joke, but like someone who had stood in the middle of a storm and didn't flinch. Malik walked through the hall with Bryce like he always did. But Bryce noticed it first. How students moved aside a little quicker. How some even nodded silently when they passed. Not out of fear. Out of respect. It wasn't just that Malik's dad was the mayor. It was how Malik carried himself through all of it, with quiet confidence that didn't need defending. At lunchtime, Jasmine finally approached their table. "Hey," she said, clutching her tray. Malik looked up. "Hi," she hesitated. "I just wanted to say, I didn't mean to laugh. I didn't think it was funny. I don't know." He didn't let her hang there. "It's all right," he said. don't join in next time." She nodded, almost embarrassed, and walked off. That's the thing about change. It doesn't always show up like a grand moment. Sometimes it arrives in awkward conversations and quiet decisions. Mrs. Halbrook never formally apologized. But over the next week, she started asking questions differently. She called on Malik more. She smiled, but not in that stiff, forced way. More in the way someone does when they're trying to do better, even if they don't know how to say it out loud. She even sent a note home at the end of the week. Handwritten, short. Malik continues to bring insight and maturity to the classroom. "Thank you for raising such a respectful young man." His father read it in the kitchen and didn't say a word. He just handed it to Malik and gave him a quiet nod of approval. In the weeks that followed, Malik's name wasn't just tied to his father anymore. Kids started talking about how he always had the best answers in science, how he helped Ava find her lost library book, how he stuck up for a third grader who'd dropped his tray in the lunchroom. The story about the mayor walking into room 204 was still told, of course. But it wasn't the punchline people remembered. It was the lesson. That dignity speaks louder than volume. That truth doesn't always need backup, but it deserves recognition. That even a classroom, especially a classroom, should never be a place where someone is told who they can't be. Malik never brought it up again. He didn't need to. He'd shown what needed showing. His father had spoken what needed saying, and the silence that once tried to drown him had been cracked wide open. Weeks later, during an assembly about leadership, the principal brought up the power of showing up. She didn't mention names, but everyone sitting in those folding chairs knew who she was talking about. Before they left that afternoon, Bryce leaned over to Malik and whispered, "You know she was talking about you, right?" Malik gave a small shrug. "Maybe," Bryce grinned. "Next time someone calls you a liar, I'm just pointing to the door and waiting for your dad to walk through." Malik laughed. "Nah, next time I'll handle it myself." And he meant it. Because while his dad had walked in that day to say what needed to be said, Malik had done something even harder. He stayed. He sat through the laughter, the whispers, the weight of being doubted, and he never flinched. And that kind of strength doesn't come from titles or headlines. It comes from knowing who you are, even when someone else tries to rewrite your story. Some bruises fade, but lessons? The ones worth remembering, they last a lifetime. If this story spoke to you, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Stories like this matter, because respect, identity, and truth should never be up for debate.
12-year-old Jordan was excited for his first-class flight until the crew decided he didn't belong. Jordan's heart thumped with excitement as he gripped his boarding pass. This wasn't just any trip. It was his first international flight. A 12-year-old with a love for airplanes, he had spent weeks watching travel videos, memorizing flight paths, and imagining the experience of soaring above the clouds. Today, it was real. His mother, Camille, walked beside him, adjusting the strap of her handbag as they moved through the bustling terminal of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. She glanced down at her son, amused by the way his eyes darted from one towering departure screen to another. "You're gonna wear yourself out before we even get on the plane," she teased, nudging him playfully. Jordan barely heard her. He was too focused on the pristine Boeing 787 Dreamliner parked at the gate. "So much bigger in person," he whispered, staring out the window. Passengers were lining up in their designated boarding groups, but Jordan's ticket was different. For the first time in his life, he wasn't in economy. His father had arranged first-class seats for him and his mum as a special treat. "This is gonna be amazing," he said under his breath, barely containing his grin as they moved toward the priority boarding lane. The feeling of skipping the long lines made him feel important, like one of those business travelers in fancy suits. A flight attendant stood at the entrance, scanning tickets and greeting passengers with a polished smile. Jordan practically bounced on his heels when it was his turn, handing over his pass with the excitement of a kid unwrapping a gift on Christmas morning. The scanner beeped. The attendant glanced at the ticket, then at Jordan. "Welcome aboard," she said, handing it back. He took it with both hands, as if it were a golden ticket to a world he had only dreamed of. But just as he stepped onto the plane, the feeling of joy flickered, like a light about to dim. Something was about to change. Jordan stepped into the cabin, his breath catching at the sight of the plush, oversized seats arranged in a sleek, spacious layout. The first-class section looked like a completely different world. Wide leather recliners, personal screens, and flight attendants moving with an air of quiet efficiency. It smelled of fresh linen and citrus, nothing like the cramped, crowded economy section he was used to. He glanced down at his ticket again, matching the seat number. 4A, right near the window. Perfect. Just as he reached his seat, a voice cut through the hum of boarding passengers. "Excuse me, young man," a woman in a crisp navy blue uniform said, stepping into his path. Jordan looked up. The flight attendant had the same polished smile as the one at the gate, but there was something in her expression that made his stomach tighten. "This section is for first-class passengers only," she said. For a moment, Jordan thought she was joking. Maybe she had mistaken him for a kid who had wandered in from economy. He held up his ticket with a small, confident smile. "I am in first class." The attendant's gaze flicked to the boarding pass, then back to him. Her smile thinned. "Where did you get this ticket?" The question stung. Jordan blinked, caught off guard. "My dad got it for me," he said slowly. "It's my seat." The woman's lips pressed together, and instead of stepping aside, she turned her head toward the galley. "One moment," she murmured, motioning for another crew member. Passengers in the nearby rows started to take notice. A businessman adjusting his tie glanced up from his laptop. A woman sipping a glass of champagne lowered her flute just slightly. Jordan could feel the weight of their stares. His grip on his boarding pass tightened. His mother wasn't beside him. She had gone to the restroom before boarding. He swallowed, suddenly wishing she were here. The second flight attendant, an older man with silver at his temples, approached and took the ticket from the woman's hand. He scanned it, his expression unreadable. "Let me check with the front desk," he said. "Just stay here." Jordan shifted uncomfortably as the first flight attendant continued to stand in front of him, blocking his path. Passengers were still boarding, maneuvering around him as if he were an obstacle. The businessman with the laptop stole another glance, his brows slightly furrowed. A woman with a designer handbag whispered something to her husband. Jordan could feel his ears burning. He wasn't sure what made him more uncomfortable. The fact that he was being questioned, or the way the other passengers were looking at him now, their gazes filled with quiet speculation. But the worst part? He wasn't even sure what he had done wrong. Jordan's palms felt clammy. His fingers clenched around the boarding pass, as if holding it tighter would somehow prove it was real. The flight attendant still stood in front of him, unmoving. The other crew member had disappeared to check his ticket. Jordan knew there was nothing to check. It was his seat. It had always been his seat. But the way people were looking at him now made him feel like an intruder. A middle-aged man in a charcoal grey suit sat in the aisle seat across from him, adjusting his gold watch as he glanced over. His eyes lingered on Jordan just long enough for him to notice. Not curiosity. Doubt. A woman a few rows ahead, dressed in a cream blazer, let out a soft sigh and turned away, shaking her head. Jordan swallowed. His throat felt dry. Then his mother's voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" Camille's heels clicked sharply against the carpeted aisle as she approached. Her eyes flickered from the flight attendant to her son. She could see it immediately. Something was wrong. Jordan exhaled, the relief almost overwhelming. The flight attendant turned to her with a tight smile. "Ma'am, we're just verifying your son's seat assignment. There seems to be a mix-up." Camille's expression didn't change. "A mix-up?" She turned to Jordan, who silently handed her his ticket. One glance was all it took. "This isn't a mix-up," she said, her voice calm but firm. "My son is in seat 4A. The older flight attendant returned at that moment, ticket still in hand. "We weren't able to find an issue with the booking. he admitted, but there was hesitation in his voice. Jordan felt his chest loosen slightly. See, it was fine. But the first flight attendant still wasn't convinced. She looked at Camille, then Jordan, then back at her colleague. Maybe the system made a mistake. Could it be an upgrade that wasn't processed correctly? Camille's lips parted slightly, her brows raising in disbelief. An upgrade? She repeated. Jordan felt a sinking sensation in his gut. They were still questioning it. Still questioning him. His mother inhaled sharply through her nose before speaking again, her voice steady. If there was an issue, why wasn't it brought up at the gate? His ticket was scanned just like everyone else's. The flight attendant hesitated. Around them, the subtle hum of quiet murmurs filled the cabin. Jordan could feel people watching. He could feel their assumptions. Camille turned to her son. "Sit down, baby," she said softly, but there was an edge to her voice. Jordan slid into his seat. For a moment it seemed like the ordeal was over. The attendants exchanged a glance, and the woman finally stepped aside. Jordan let out a shaky breath. But then the businessman across the aisle shifted in his seat and spoke. "Maybe it's just a misunderstanding," he said lightly, looking at Camille. "You know, they have to be careful about security these days." Jordan's stomach twisted. His mother's head turned slowly toward the man. She stared at him for a long second, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile. "Oh, I see," she said smoothly. "And what exactly are they securing my son from?" The businessman opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked away. Jordan exhaled, barely realizing he had been holding his breath. But something told him this wasn't over. Camille sat down beside her son, but the tension in her shoulders hadn't eased. She adjusted the strap of her handbag with slow, deliberate movements, her expression unreadable. Jordan knew that look. His mother wasn't the type to cause a scene, but when pushed, she knew how to handle herself. The flight attendant lingered for a moment longer before finally retreating to the galley. Jordan tried to focus on his seat, on the comfortable armrests, on the fact that this was supposed to be an incredible experience. But it didn't feel incredible anymore. His mother must have noticed because she placed a hand on his knee and gave it a small squeeze. "You okay?" she asked, her voice softer now. Jordan nodded, but the embarrassment still burned. "I don't get it," he mumbled. "Why did they think my ticket wasn't real?" Camille exhaled slowly. "Baby, some people see things and make assumptions. It's not right, but it happens." Jordan frowned. He had been too caught up in the moment to fully understand. But now, with the attention shifting away, his mind started piecing things together. The looks, the hesitation, the whispered conversations. If it had been a white boy his age standing there with a first-class ticket, would they have questioned it? Before he could ask, movement near the front of the cabin caught his attention. The first flight attendant had returned, but this time she wasn't alone. A supervisor. A woman in her 40s, dressed in a navy blazer with a name tag pinned neatly to her chest. She carried a tablet in one hand and a strained expression on her face. Jordan's stomach twisted. Camille turned just as the woman reached their row. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice cool. The supervisor smiled tightly. "I just need to verify the ticket once more." Jordan didn't move. Camille, however, did. She unbuckled her seatbelt, took the boarding pass from her son's hand, and stood. The supervisor took a step back, clearly not expecting that. Camille handed over the ticket. "There's nothing to verify," she said. "But by all means, check again." The supervisor hesitated before scanning the barcode on her tablet. Jordan watched, his hands curling into fists as the screen blinked once. Green. A confirmation. The woman looked up. "There's no issue," she admitted, clearing her throat. "Everything checks out." Camille's eyes didn't leave her. "Of course it does." There was a long pause. The supervisor shifted, suddenly aware of the uncomfortable silence that had settled over the cabin. Jordan could feel it. The businessman across the aisle was pretending to look at his laptop, but he wasn't typing. A couple of passengers in the row ahead had turned slightly, as if eavesdropping without trying to be obvious. The supervisor exhaled. "We apologize for the inconvenience." Jordan expected his mother to let it go, to sit back down and move on, but she didn't. She tilted her head slightly. "An inconvenience?" she repeated, her voice dangerously polite. The supervisor straightened. "We just needed to ensure everything was in order." Camille nodded slowly, as if weighing the words. Then she leaned in ever so slightly, lowering her voice, but not enough that others couldn't hear. "Tell me," she said, "how often do you double-check first-class tickets for 12-year-old boys?" The supervisor's lips parted. Jordan's pulse quickened. He could see the shift, the way the woman realized what had just happened. Camille didn't wait for an answer. She took the ticket from the supervisor's hand, sat back down, and buckled her seatbelt. "We're done here," she said, her tone dismissive. The supervisor hesitated for a second longer, then nodded once before turning and walking away. The tension lingered. The whispers picked up again. Jordan could feel the eyes on him. He swallowed, looking at his mom. She was calm again, adjusting her bracelet like nothing had happened. Jordan exhaled. But before he could fully relax, another voice interrupted, one he recognized immediately. "What seems to be the issue here?" Jordan froze. His father had arrived. The deep voice carried through the cabin like a sharp gust of wind, cutting through the murmurs and hushed whispers. Heads turned. Passengers straightened in their seats, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Jordan barely had time to react before he saw him. His father. Standing tall in the aisle, dressed in a sharp navy suit with a crisp white shirt, Malcolm Hayes was not a man easily ignored. His presence alone commanded attention. The slight furrow in his brow, the measured way he adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, the calm but unmistakable authority in his voice, it all sent a message before he even finished speaking. "I asked," he repeated, slower this time, "what the issue is." The supervisor, who had just moments ago been dismissing Jordan's mother with a clipped apology, visibly tensed. Jordan's heart pounded. His father wasn't an angry man. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. When Malcolm Hayes walked into a room, people paid attention. The supervisor straightened, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "Sir, I assure you, this was just a misunderstanding," she said carefully. His father gave her a long, unreadable look. Jordan knew that look. It meant he wasn't buying it. Malcolm's eyes shifted to his son, then to Camille, as if assessing the damage. Jordan could see the flicker of irritation behind his father's usually composed expression. Then, slowly, Malcolm reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and tapped the screen a few times. The flight attendant and supervisor watched, their nervousness growing. Finally, he spoke again. "I just got off a call with the regional manager for this airline," he said smoothly, sliding his phone back into his pocket. "She'll be very interested in hearing about the way my son and wife were treated today." The supervisor blinked. Malcolm wasn't done. "In fact," he continued, "I think she'll want to discuss it with someone a little higher up. Maybe corporate." He let the words settle before adding, almost as an afterthought, "Seeing as how I own the airline." The supervisor's breath hitched. The color drained from the flight attendant's face. A few passengers gasped. Jordan sat frozen, watching the realization dawn on the crew members' faces. The businessman across the aisle cleared his throat and suddenly found his laptop very interesting. Camille smirked, turning toward Jordan. "You okay now, baby?" Jordan exhaled, nodding slowly. His father's eyes were still on the supervisor. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The weight of his words had already done enough damage. The supervisor, her face tight with forced politeness, tried to recover. "Mr. Hayes, please understand. This was never about—" Malcolm raised a hand, cutting her off. "Save it." His tone was smooth, but there was steel underneath. The woman clamped her mouth shut. Malcolm turned his gaze to the first flight attendant, the one who had started the entire ordeal. She wouldn't even look at him. A long, heavy silence stretched through the cabin. Then Malcolm simply tilted his head slightly and said, "We'll be having a conversation about this after the flight." The supervisor visibly swallowed. Passengers were still staring, some in shock, some in discomfort, others with quiet satisfaction. Jordan, for the first time since stepping onto the plane, finally let his shoulders relax. But he still had one question burning in his mind. Why did it have to take all of this just for them to believe him? The supervisor gave a stiff nod before turning on her heel, walking briskly back toward the galley, her back rigid with tension. The flight attendant who had questioned Jordan's ticket followed quickly, her polished smile nowhere to be seen. For a moment, the entire first-class cabin felt frozen in time. Passengers who had been quietly spectating suddenly pretended to be preoccupied with their screens, magazines, or drinks. The businessman across the aisle glanced at Malcolm, then at Jordan, and quickly turned back to his laptop, typing something that didn't need typing. Jordan could feel his own heartbeat in his ears. His father exhaled through his nose, adjusting his cuff again. A small movement, but Jordan knew it meant he was still irritated. Camille, however, looked amused. She leaned back in her seat, crossing her legs as if she had just won a game only she knew they were playing. She didn't even glance at the crew members as they scurried away. Instead, she turned to Jordan and smoothed a hand over his curls. "Now," she said lightly, "are you ready to enjoy your flight?" Jordan hesitated. He should be relieved. His father had just shut down an entire situation with a few words. He wasn't just another passenger. He owned the airline. The whole thing felt like a movie, except it had actually happened. Still, it didn't sit right. His father must have noticed because he let out a quiet sigh before lowering himself into the seat across the aisle from them. "Son," he said, voice calm, "talk to me." Jordan hesitated before finally asking, "Would this have happened if I looked different?" The question lingered in the air. His father didn't rush to answer. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, his expression thoughtful. "You already know the answer," he said finally. Jordan swallowed. He did know. Camille exhaled, shaking her head slightly. "You were just a kid sitting in a seat you paid for," she muttered. And yet somehow that wasn't enough. Jordan looked down at his hands. It hadn't mattered that he had a first-class ticket, that his father literally owned the company. They hadn't seen any of that. They had just seen him. And that was enough for them to question whether he belonged. He wanted to be happy that his father had put them in their place, but why did it take all that? His dad reached over and rested a hand on his shoulder. "Let me tell you something, son," he said. "Power isn't about how much money you have or how high up you are. Power is about knowing who you are and never letting them make you question it." Jordan met his father's gaze. There was something steady in it, something unshaken. His mother nodded, adding, "They wanted you to feel small, baby. That's why they did it. But look at you. You didn't shrink." Jordan let the words sink in. For the first time since stepping onto the plane, he didn't feel nervous. He felt proud. The hum of conversation in the cabin slowly returned to normal. The flight crew was still avoiding eye contact, but that didn't matter anymore. The lesson had already been learned, but not just by them. Jordan leaned back in his seat, finally allowing himself to relax. But just as he was settling in, his father turned to him with a smirk. "Oh, and don't get too comfortable," Malcolm said casually, "because the next time I buy you a first-class ticket, you'll be paying me back." Jordan's jaw dropped. "What?" His mother laughed. The flight attendants did their best to pretend nothing had happened, though Jordan could still sense the tension lingering in the air. The same people who had looked at him with skepticism now avoided his gaze altogether. But it wasn't just the flight crew who had learned something today. Jordan could tell from the way some passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sneaking glances when they thought he wasn't looking. Some were embarrassed. Others, maybe, were rethinking things. And then there were those who would never admit they had been wrong. The businessman across the aisle fell into that last category. He hadn't said another word after Malcolm's reveal. He kept his eyes locked on his laptop, but his hands had stilled over the keyboard. His silence spoke volumes. Jordan wasn't mad at him. If anything, he pitied him. His father, on the other hand, had already moved on. He reached into the side compartment of his seat, pulling out a newspaper. An actual newspaper, not a tablet or a phone. Jordan smirked. Classic Dad. Camille had already started flipping through the in-flight menu. "Ooh," she said, eyes lighting up. "They've got warm chocolate chip cookies on this flight." Jordan perked up. "Wait, really?" His mum grinned. "First-class perks, baby." He exhaled, shaking off the weight of everything that had happened. It still bothered him. It probably always would. But his dad's words echoed in his head. Power is knowing who you are, and never letting them make you question it. And right now, he was hungry. The flight attendant from earlier hesitated before approaching their row. Her professional mask was back in place, but her voice was a little tighter now. "Would you like anything to drink?" Camille glanced at Jordan. "What do you say, baby?" Jordan didn't miss the slight challenge in her tone. She was giving him a choice. He could act small, act like none of it had happened, let them move past it, pretend it never occurred. Or, he smiled up at the attendant, voice steady, "I'll have a Sprite." A pause. Then the woman nodded. "Of course." She turned and walked toward the galley, her posture just a little stiffer than before. Jordan relaxed. Camille smirked, handing him the menu. "And what about those cookies?" He grinned. "I think we should order a few extra." His father chuckled behind his newspaper. "That's my boy." As the plane started its taxi down the runway, Jordan glanced around the first-class cabin one last time. Everything looked the same. The leather seats, the polished surfaces, the passengers settling in for a smooth ride. But he felt different. He hadn't just taken his first international flight today. He had learned something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. No matter where he went, no matter how much people doubted him, he belonged. And that was something no one could ever take away. Life has a way of testing us in unexpected moments. Jordan didn't expect to be questioned over a seat that was already his. He didn't expect to see how quickly people can judge before they understand. But he also didn't expect to leave that flight stronger than he was before. And maybe that's the real lesson. Stand your ground, know your worth, and never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. If you found this story thought-provoking, eye-opening, or inspiring, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, a simple story can change the way we see the world.